On my 30th birthday, I sat alone in my Seattle apartment staring at a store-bought cupcake while my family sent my sister to Paris and captioned the Instagram post, "She's the only one who truly makes us proud." I couldn't believe I was reading those words on what was supposed to be my day, watching strangers celebrate her life while mine went completely unnoticed. The truth hit me like a freight train. For 30 years, I'd been the invisible daughter, the backup plan, the one who gave everything and got nothing, and they didn't even pretend to hide it anymore. But what happened next changed everything, because buried in our joint bank account was $36,000 of my money they'd been using to fund the very favoritism that was killing me. The shocking part wasn't just the betrayal or the lies or the infidelity of trust. It was realizing I'd been paying for my own humiliation, month after month, for 6 straight years. And when I finally took it all back and exposed the truth, my entire family imploded in ways I never saw coming. This is the story of how I went from being the scapegoat to reclaiming my dignity, and what I learned about revenge, justice, and what it really means to choose yourself when the people who should love you have already chosen someone else. I turned 30 last Tuesday in Seattle, and the only thing sitting on my kitchen counter was a store-bought cupcake with a single candle I'd bought for myself. My phone stayed silent all morning. No calls, no texts, nothing from the people who were supposed to love me. Then I made the mistake of opening Instagram, and there it was. My mom's post with my sister Emma at the airport, designer luggage stacked high, champagne glasses clinking, headed to Paris for 2 weeks. The caption? "So proud of my girl. She's the only one who truly makes us proud." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Those words didn't just sting. They carved themselves into my chest like a knife I'd been feeling for years, but never saw coming this sharp, this public, this final. The humiliation of it washed over me in waves. Not just that they forgot, but that they chose to celebrate her on my birthday and post it for the world to see. I sat there staring at that screen, my cupcake going stale, thinking about every single birthday that came before this one. When Emma turned 32 years ago, they threw her a surprise party at that expensive restaurant downtown. 60 people, live music, a cake that cost more than my rent. When I turned 25, they sent a text at 11 p.m. saying they'd been so busy and would make it up to me. They never did. This wasn't new, but seeing it spelled out in a public Instagram post, seeing other people comment with heart emojis and "you raised her right," made something inside me crack wide open. The betrayal wasn't just in the trip or the forgotten birthday. It was in how comfortable they were showing the world exactly how little I mattered. I'd spent 8 years working my fingers to the bone trying to prove I was worthy of their attention, their pride, their basic respect. And here was my answer, posted for 847 people to see. I thought about calling them, but what would I even say? "Hey Mom, remember me? Your other daughter? The one turning 30 today?" The truth is, I'd had that conversation 100 times in my head, and it always ended the same way, with me apologizing for making them feel bad about treating me badly. That's what happens when you're the invisible child. You learn to make yourself even smaller so nobody has to face what they've done to you. But something felt different this time, sitting in my tiny apartment with my sad cupcake and my silenced phone. Maybe it was turning 30, maybe it was the public shaming, or maybe I'd just finally hit my limit. The shocking part wasn't that they'd chosen Emma again. It was that I'd let them do it for so long without ever fighting back. And that's when I remembered something I'd been trying not to think about. The joint bank account. My hands were shaking as I logged into our joint bank account, the one I'd been putting $500 into every single month for the past 6 years. They'd convinced me it was for family emergencies, for helping each other out, for staying connected even when you're far away. I was 24 when they set it up, desperate for any thread that tied me to them, any proof that I was part of the family. So I fed that account religiously, even when my own rent was late, even when I had to skip meals to make the transfer go through. $36,000 over 6 years. That's what I'd invested in being their daughter. And as I scrolled through the transaction history, my stomach dropped into my shoes, because emergency apparently meant first-class tickets, boutique shopping sprees, and direct transfers to Emma with notes like Europe Fund and career investment. There were charges I recognized and some I didn't. A travel agency in Miami, a jewelry store I'd never heard of, monthly transfers labeled e-support that added up to thousands. My vision went blurry, trying to calculate how much of my money had funded the very life that made them proud while I stayed invisible, broke, and alone. The infidelity of it hit me harder than any cheating boyfriend ever could. This was my family lying to my face, using my love and desperation against me, draining me dry while building someone else up. I felt like I'd been backstabbed by the only people who were supposed to protect me. And somewhere in that moment, scrolling through proof of my own exploitation, something cold and sharp settled in my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter, more dangerous. The kind of clarity that only comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about who people really are. I didn't cry, which surprised me, because I'd cried over smaller things they'd done 1,000 times before. Instead, I opened a calculator and started adding up every single deposit I'd made. Every $500, this is all I can spare right now. Every month I chose them over myself. $36,000. That number sat on my screen like a verdict. And then, with hands steadier than they'd been all day, I logged into my personal account and started planning something I'd never had the dignity or self-worth to do before. Before I touched a single dollar, I made sure I was legally allowed to. Joint account, my name on it, my deposits. I wasn't just going to confront them or cry about fairness or beg them to see me. I was going to take back what was mine, piece by piece, transfer by transfer. Because if they could fund Emma's dream life with my payback money and not lose a second of sleep, then I could reclaim my own future without apologizing for it. The favoritism wasn't something I discovered at 30. It was the air I'd been breathing since childhood. So constant I didn't even know it was poisonous until I was already choking on it. Emma got the master bedroom with the bay window and her own bathroom. I got the converted storage room next to the water heater that rattled all night. When she wanted piano lessons at 8 years old, they found the best teacher in the state and drove her an hour each way twice a week. When I asked for a photography class at 12, Dad looked at me over his newspaper and said, "Maybe when we're not stretched so thin." And then that same month, they bought Emma a brand new MacBook for her creative projects. I watched it happen over and over, this pattern of investment versus indifference. And I told myself it was temporary, that my turn would come, that maybe I just needed to try harder or be better or need less. Every family gathering became a stage for Emma's achievements while I faded into the wallpaper with the aunts and uncles who couldn't remember what I was studying. She'd talk about her internship at the marketing firm, and Mom would glow like Emma had cured cancer, adding details Emma hadn't even mentioned and making sure everyone knew, we always knew she was special. When I graduated college with honors, working full-time to pay for it myself while Emma's tuition got covered without question, I got a card in the mail 3 weeks late with a generic "congrats" scrawled inside. No party, no dinner, no "we're proud of you." Just proof that excellence without their attention was invisible, while mediocrity with their favor was legendary. The family drama wasn't loud or obvious. It was this quiet, constant erasure that made me feel crazy for even noticing it. I remember Emma's college graduation. They rented a beach house for the weekend, invited extended family, had a professional photographer, the whole production. My graduation? Mom called the morning of and said they couldn't make the drive because Dad's back was acting up. But then I saw Facebook photos of them at Emma's boyfriend's barbecue that same evening, Dad looking perfectly fine flipping burgers. That's when the betrayal started feeling less like oversight and more like choice. They weren't too busy or too broke or too tired. They were just saving their energy, money, and pride for the daughter who mattered. And Emma, to her credit, didn't seem to notice she was drowning in privileges I was being denied. She'd gotten so used to being the golden child, that she genuinely believed she'd earned everything through merit alone, never seeing the rigged game that put her 3 steps ahead before the race even started. I tried to talk to Mom about it once, maybe 5 years ago, after they'd missed my birthday but threw Emma a surprise party for getting a promotion. I said, carefully, gently, "I feel like you and Dad prioritize Emma over me, and it hurts." And you know what she said? "You're being dramatic. We love you both equally. We just relate to Emma more because you two are so different. Relate to her more." Like love was supposed to be conditional on how much we entertained them or reflected their values. Like I was supposed to accept being the scapegoat because my personality didn't match their expectations. I left that conversation feeling smaller than I'd arrived, and I didn't bring it up again. That's the thing about family betrayal. It trains you to stop defending yourself, to normalize the abnormal, to accept crumbs and call it a meal. But now I had proof it was more than just emotional neglect. It was financial exploitation too. But seeing those bank statements changed everything, because now I had proof it wasn't just emotional. It was financial. They'd been bleeding me dry to fund the very favoritism that was killing me. Every time I transferred that $500, I was literally paying for my own exclusion, investing in a family that had already decided I wasn't worth the investment. The rage that I'd been swallowing for years started bubbling up, hot and acidic, mixing with this ice-cold clarity. I'd been the backup plan, the ATM, the emotional support animal they called when Emma was busy. But never the priority, never the pride, never the one who truly made them proud. And the most shocking part was realizing they didn't even feel guilty about it. In their minds, this was just how things were, how things had always been, how things would always be. I spent that whole night pulling up memories like evidence in a trial I was building in my head. Every recital of Emma's they attended versus every volleyball game of mine they missed. Every time they bragged about her job while changing the subject when I mentioned mine. Every Christmas where her gifts filled half the living room while mine fit in a grocery bag. The pattern was so clear it was almost funny, except I'd wasted decades trying to be good enough to break it. And now, staring at 6 years of bank transfers that proved I was nothing but a resource to exploit, I felt something shift. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to explain or justify or try to make them see me. I was going to take my dignity back, my money back, my self-worth back. And I was going to do it so quietly they wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. The first transfer went through at 2 a.m., $2,500. Moved from joint to personal with one click. The next morning, I woke up with that Instagram post still burned into my brain and logged into the joint account with a purpose I'd never felt before. I sat there with my coffee, my laptop, and a spreadsheet I'd built at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. Every single deposit I'd made since 2018, organized by date and amount. $36,000 wasn't just a number anymore. It was 6 years of my life. 6 years of choosing them over myself. 6 years of proof that I loved them more than they'd ever loved me. And as I looked at the current balance, $41,000, meaning they'd barely touched it except to fund Emma's adventures, I realized something that made my hands stop shaking. This wasn't stealing. This was reclaiming. This was payback in the most literal sense. I didn't take it all at once. That would have been too obvious. Too easy to spin as me losing it, or acting crazy. Instead, I set up a series of transfers, pulling back my $500 deposits in reverse, month by month, like rewinding a tape of my own exploitation. First transfer, $2,500. Second transfer, 3 days later, $3,000. Then another, and another, spacing them out just enough to look like normal account activity if anyone glanced at the statements. The revenge wasn't in the act itself. It was in the calm, calculated precision of it, in knowing that every dollar I took back was a piece of my dignity I'd left on their altar for too long. I wasn't yelling or confronting or explaining. I was just quietly, methodically, undoing the financial tie that had kept me tethered to people who saw me as an investment property, not a daughter. With each transfer, I felt lighter, like I was shedding weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. The truth was, I'd been so busy trying to prove I deserved their love that I'd never stopped to ask if they deserved mine. And the answer, watching my personal account balance climb while the joint account drained, was a resounding no. They'd lied about what that account was for, cheated me out of years of financial stability, and betrayed the basic trust a child should be able to have in her parents. The infidelity of it wasn't romantic, but it cut deeper. Because you can leave a cheating partner, but you can't unfamily your family. Can't unlearn the belief that you're supposed to sacrifice everything for people who wouldn't cross the street for you. I found myself laughing sometimes while I made the transfers. Not a happy laugh, but the kind that comes when something is so absurd you can't process it any other way. They'd set up this account to keep me close, and I'd fallen for it like the desperate, approval-starved kid I'd always been around them. But here's what they didn't count on. I'd grown up. I had my own income, my own apartment, my own life that didn't need their validation to function. And the moment I stopped seeing that joint account as a family bond and started seeing it as a business transaction, everything became clear. I didn't owe them continued access to my earnings just because we shared DNA. I didn't owe them explanations for taking back what I'd given in good faith before I knew they were using it to fund my own erasure. By the end of week 2, I'd pulled back $28,000 of my original $36,000, and my phone still hadn't rung. No calls, no texts, no, "Hey, did you mean to withdraw that money?" Because they weren't checking. They never checked on me, never wondered if I was okay or needed help, or noticed when I went silent for weeks. I was supposed to be the reliable one, the steady deposit, the daughter who asked for nothing and gave everything. And as long as I played that role, I was invisible. But the second I stopped performing, the second I prioritized myself over their comfort, I knew the explosion was coming. And honestly, I was ready for it. Because this time, when they came at me with guilt and manipulation, I had receipts. I had proof. I had the truth on my side. The last $8,000 I decided to leave for now, not out of generosity, but strategy. I wanted them to notice the drain before it hit zero. Wanted that moment of panic when they realized the ATM had shut off. And when they finally came knocking, demanding to know what I'd done and why I'd betrayed them, I'd have the most satisfying answer I'd ever given them. I learned from the best. The karma of it was poetic, really. They'd spent 30 years teaching me I was worthless, and I'd spent 6 years paying for the privilege. But now class was over, tuition was refunded, and I was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. You can't build one daughter's dream on another daughter's back and expect the foundation to hold forever. I'd been watching my personal savings account grow for 3 weeks. Money I hadn't seen in years. Money that was supposed to be mine all along. When my phone finally exploded. 7 missed calls from Mom, 4 from Dad. A string of texts that started with confusion and ended with accusations. "What's going on with the family account? Did you take money out? We need to talk immediately." And then, the kicker from Dad. "This is selfish and unacceptable. We raised you better than this." I stared at that message for a full minute, feeling something hot and sharp rise in my throat. Selfish. After 6 years of bleeding myself dry for them, after 30 years of being the afterthought, the backup plan, the invisible daughter, I was selfish for taking back my own money. I didn't call back right away, which was its own kind of power move. The old me would have panicked, would have apologized immediately, would have put the money back and begged forgiveness for daring to prioritize myself. But the new me, the one who'd seen exactly how they'd been using me, who'd watched my sister board a plane to Paris funded partially by my emergency contributions, sat with it. I let them stew. I let them feel the panic of losing control. And when Mom finally got me on the phone 2 days later, her voice was doing that thing where she tried to sound hurt instead of angry. Like I was the one who'd wounded her. "Honey, we don't understand what's happening. Did we do something wrong? Why are you punishing us?" That word, punishing, almost made me laugh. Like enforcing a boundary was an attack. Like reclaiming stolen money was vengeance. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. I looked at the account statements. I saw where the money went. Travel agencies, transfers to Emma, shopping. That account was supposed to be for emergencies, and you've been using it like a personal fund for everything except emergencies. Silence. Long, thick silence that told me she was scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't sound as bad as the truth. Then, Paris was different. Emma needed this opportunity for her career. We were going to pay you back, but she said it without conviction, without dates or plans, just vague promises that dissolved the second they hit air. You've been saying you'll pay me back for 6 years, I said, feeling the anger start to crack through my calm. I've put in $36,000, and I've never seen a dime of it benefit me. Not once. Not for my emergencies, not for my opportunities, not for my life. Just Emma's. And that's when Dad got on the line. I could hear him breathing before he even spoke. That heavy, disappointed sigh he'd perfected for moments when I dared to have needs or feelings. You don't understand what it takes to run a family, he said, voice hard. We make sacrifices you can't see. And frankly, this attitude is exactly why we relate to your sister more. She understands family comes first. The audacity of it hit me like a slap. Family comes first. Their family, the one where Emma was the golden child and I was the ATM. If family comes first, I said, voice shaking now with rage I'd held back for decades, why did you forget my 30th birthday? Why did you post about Emma on Instagram with a caption about how she's the only one who makes you proud? Why have I spent my entire life trying to earn what you give her for free? I heard Mom gasp, like I'd said something unspeakable, like naming the truth was worse than living the lie. That's not fair, she started, but I cut her off. What's not fair is using me for money while treating me like I don't exist. What's not fair is building her dream life on my back and expecting me to smile about it. The call ended with them demanding I return the money, threatening to take action, whatever that meant, and Mom crying about how I was tearing the family apart. I hung up feeling something I'd never felt after a confrontation with them. Powerful. Not guilty, not small, not wrong, powerful. Because I'd finally said it out loud, all of it, and the world didn't end. The truth didn't kill me, and for the first time in my life, I realized their approval wasn't worth the price they were charging. I'd rather be the daughter who betrayed them by having self-worth than the daughter who betrayed herself by staying small. And whatever came next, lawsuits, family explosions, public shaming, I was ready, because I'd already survived the worst thing they could do to me. 30 years of making me feel like I didn't matter. The next few weeks were psychological warfare disguised as family concern. Emails from Mom with subject lines like, "Please, we need to talk about this," and "I'm worried about you," filled with paragraphs about how I was throwing away the family over money, and how we all make mistakes, but love should be unconditional. Dad sent a formal, almost legal-sounding message about financial responsibilities and shared agreements that made me want to screenshot it and send it to a lawyer just to watch him squirm. But the real gut punch came when they started using the word emergency for real, claiming they were about to lose the house, that they'd counted on that money for the mortgage, that I was literally making them homeless with my revenge. I almost believed them for a second. That's how good they were at this, how well they'd trained me to feel responsible for their problems. But then I did something I'd never done before. I called their bluff. I looked up their house online, checked public records, found out they'd refinanced 2 years ago, and their mortgage was barely half what they were claiming. I asked pointed questions about their finances that they couldn't answer without contradicting themselves. And slowly, the emergency story started falling apart, revealing what it really was. Manipulation. One more attempt to guilt me back into my role as the family ATM. The betrayal of it, using fake crisis to emotionally blackmail me, somehow hurt worse than the real theft had. "You're really going to let your parents suffer because you're angry?" Mom asked during one particularly brutal phone call, her voice cracking in that theatrical way she'd perfected. and something in me just snapped. "You're not suffering," I said, voice cold and clear. "You're uncomfortable. You're facing consequences. There's a difference. And honestly, Mom, if you'd spent half the energy you're spending manipulating me right now on actually being my parent for the last 30 years, we wouldn't be here." The silence that followed was so complete I thought she'd hung up. Then, quietly, with more venom than I'd ever heard from her, "I don't know who you've become, but it's not the daughter I raised." "You're right," I said, and I meant it. The daughter you raised would have apologized by now. She would have put the money back and swallowed her pain and spent another decade trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. But I'm not her anymore. I'm the woman who finally realized she deserves better than being used and ignored and publicly humiliated on her birthday. And if that's not who you want me to be, then maybe you never wanted a daughter. You just wanted a piggy bank who didn't talk back. I hung up before she could respond, hands shaking but heart steady, knowing I'd just burned a bridge I'd been desperately trying to repair my whole life. The emails got more desperate after that. Dad sent one with the subject line, "Final Warning," that threatened legal action, which made me laugh because I'd already talked to a real lawyer who'd confirmed what I suspected. The joint account was legally mine to withdraw from, and they had no case. Mom tried a different angle, sending old photos of us when I was little with captions like, "Remember when we were happy?" and "I miss my sweet girl." Each one was a tiny knife aimed at my guilt, at my longing for a family that never existed the way I remembered it. But I was done bleeding for them. I saved the emails, blocked their numbers temporarily, and used the energy I would have spent defending myself on something revolutionary, building a life they had no part in. I enrolled in a medical billing certification course I'd been eyeing for 2 years but could never afford because of those $500 monthly transfers. Met people in class who were also rebuilding themselves. Patricia, who'd left an abusive marriage at 50. Vanessa, who was changing careers after her company folded. Women who listened when I talked, who validated my anger instead of telling me to forgive and forget, who understood that sometimes reclaiming your dignity looks like cutting off people who drain it. For the first time in my life, I was investing in myself with the same dedication I'd once invested in earning my parents' approval. And the return on this investment? It was immediate. It was real. It was mine. Every time my phone buzzed with another guilt trip from home, I looked at my growing savings account, my course materials, the group chat with Patricia and Vanessa making plans for after we graduated. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months ago, sad, small, still believing she could earn love by being useful. And then I thought about the woman I was becoming, someone who knew her worth wasn't up for debate, who'd rather be alone than accepted conditionally, who understood that the biggest betrayal wasn't what they'd done to me, but what I'd done to myself by allowing it. The family drama was still exploding around me, but I wasn't in the center of it anymore. I was building something else. Somewhere they couldn't touch. 3 months into my medical billing course, something unexpected happened. My instructor, Diane, pulled me aside after class and asked if I'd be interested in interviewing for a position at the hospital where she worked part-time. "They need someone sharp, detail-oriented, someone who shows up and does the work without drama," she said, looking at me with the kind of direct respect I'd been starving for my whole life. "I immediately thought of you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not because I didn't think I was capable, but because I'd spent so long being told I wasn't special, that opportunity felt like something that happened to other people, to daughters who made their parents proud. The interview was the following week, and I prepared for it like my life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. This wasn't just a job. It was proof that I could build something real without my family's help, without their approval, without being the backup plan or the invisible daughter. I walked into that hospital administrator's office wearing a blazer I'd bought with money I'd reclaimed from that joint account, and the symbolism of it wasn't lost on me. Every answer I gave, every qualification I listed, every moment of confidence I showed, it was all funded by my own payback, my own decision to choose myself. And when they offered me the position at the end of the interview, with a salary $15,000 higher than what I'd been making, I actually had to bite my lip to keep from crying. I called Patricia first, then Vanessa, and we celebrated with cheap wine in my apartment that felt like champagne because of what it represented. For the first time in 30 years, something good had happened to me that had nothing to do with my family, that existed completely outside their world, their judgments, their favoritism. This was mine. I'd earned it through my own work, my own resilience, my own refusal to stay small just because they needed me to be. The justice of it felt cosmic. While they were panicking about their emergency and sending manipulative emails, I was leveling up, moving forward, proving that their lack of faith in me said everything about them and nothing about me. I didn't tell them about the job for 2 weeks, and even then, it was only because my Aunt Linda, one of the few family members who'd stayed neutral during the explosion, asked what I'd been up to. When word got back to my parents, Mom's response was a text that said, "That's nice, honey. Glad you're staying busy." Not congratulations, not "we're proud of you," just acknowledgement that I existed and was doing something. Meanwhile, when Emma had gotten a promotion 6 months earlier, they'd thrown a dinner party and posted about it on Facebook with a whole essay about her achievements. The contrast was so stark it would have been funny if it wasn't my entire childhood summarized in 2 different reactions. But here's the thing I realized. Sitting in my new office on my first day, looking at my nameplate on the door and my computer with my login and my desk with my supplies, I didn't need them to be proud anymore. Their pride had always been conditional, performative, reserved for the daughter who fit their image. And chasing it had cost me years of my life, thousands of dollars, and nearly all my self-worth. This job, this salary, this future I was building, it was sweeter because I'd done it alone. Because no one could take credit for it or diminish it, or use it to prove I was still less than my sister. This victory was mine, and their absence from it didn't make it smaller. It made it purer. I started contributing to a real savings account, the kind with goals and timelines and dreams attached to it instead of just a hole where my family's needs lived. I thought about trips I wanted to take, not to prove anything, but because I wanted to see the world. I thought about maybe, eventually, buying my own place. Something small but mine, where no one could make me feel like I was taking up too much space or asking for too much. And every time I caught myself feeling guilty for thriving without them, for choosing my own life over their drama, I remembered that Instagram post. "She's the only one who truly makes us proud." They'd drawn the line. They'd made the choice. I was just finally believing them and acting accordingly. 4 months after I'd started taking back my money, my phone lit up with a notification that made my stomach drop. Mom had posted on Facebook. Not a direct attack, but one of those vague, passive-aggressive statuses designed to tell a story without telling it. It's heartbreaking when your own children turn their backs on you after everything you've sacrificed. Some people forget where they came from, praying for healing and forgiveness. Within an hour, it had 30 comments. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, family friends, people who had no idea what had actually happened but were more than ready to offer their judgments and support for the poor parents dealing with an ungrateful daughter. I sat there reading through the comments, watching my character get assassinated in real time by people who'd never once called to check on me, who'd never noticed I was the invisible child at every family gathering. And something in me just broke open, not in a collapsing way, but in a decision way. They wanted to make this public? Fine, let's make it public. I'd been protecting them for years, staying quiet about the favoritism and the exploitation because I was afraid of looking bitter or crazy. But I was done carrying their secrets. I was done being shamed for having boundaries. If they were going to weaponize our family drama on social media, I was going to respond with something they couldn't spin or deny. The truth. I didn't respond immediately. I took a day to write and rewrite what I wanted to say, to make sure it was factual and clear and didn't sound unhinged. And then I posted a reply directly under her status. "Mom, I didn't turn my back on you. I stopped letting you use me as an ATM while you publicly celebrated my sister on my 30th birthday with a caption about how she's the only one who makes you proud. I withdrew $36,000 from our joint account, money I deposited over 6 years that you spent on vacations and transfers to Emma, while telling me it was for emergencies. I have bank statements. I have receipts. If you want to talk about betrayal, let's start with the truth. I hit post with shaking hands and immediately turned off my phone, heart pounding like I'd just set off a bomb. When I finally turned it back on 3 hours later, the entire dynamic had shifted. The comments section had exploded, some people doubling down on defending my parents, but others started speaking up. My cousin Rachel. I always wondered why Ashley was treated differently. This explains a lot. My Uncle Tom. Wait, you took $36,000 of her money? And you're calling her ungrateful? Even people I didn't know well started chiming in with observations about favoritism they'd noticed over the years, things I'd thought I was imagining or exaggerating. The shocking part wasn't that I was right. It was that other people had seen it all along and said nothing, letting me suffer in silence while pretending everything was normal. Mom deleted the original post within 12 hours, but screenshots had already spread through the family group chats. I started getting private messages, some supportive, some accusatory, some from relatives trying to play mediator who didn't realize there was nothing to mediate. Family is family, they'd say. Maybe you could both apologize and move past this. But that's the thing about people who've never been scapegoated. They don't understand that moving past it always means the victim swallowing their pain so everyone else can be comfortable. I'd been moving past it my whole life, and all it did was teach my family they could keep hurting me without consequences. This time, the consequence was truth. And it was humiliating them in exactly the way they'd humiliated me. The family split down the middle, some on my parents' side, calling me disrespectful and cruel, some on mine, validating what I'd lived through and admitting they'd seen it happening. Emma, surprisingly, stayed silent publicly, but sent me a private message that was complicated. I didn't know about the money, she wrote. I didn't know they were telling you it was for emergencies, and I'm sorry about the Instagram caption. I didn't write it, Mom did. But I should have said something. I think I've been blind to a lot of things. It wasn't a full reckoning, wasn't enough to undo 30 years of being the favorite, but it was more than I expected. More than I'd gotten from anyone else in that family. And weirdly, that tiny crack of acknowledgement from her hurt almost more than the attacks from my parents, because it meant she could see it now if she wanted to. She'd just chosen not to before. The weirdest part of going nuclear on social media was what happened after. The silence. Not from extended family or Facebook commenters, but from my parents. After years of constant contact, constant demands, constant guilt trips, they just stopped. No more emails, no calls, no manipulation disguised as concern. It was like they'd finally realized I wasn't bluffing, that I'd actually chosen myself over their comfort, and they didn't know how to function in a dynamic where I had power. The silence should have felt like relief, and part of it did, but another part felt like grief. Not for who they were, but for who I'd spent 30 years hoping they'd become. I threw myself into my new job, into my friendships with Patricia and Vanessa, into building a life that didn't revolve around earning approval from people who were never going to give it. My savings account grew. My confidence grew. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do without over-explaining or apologizing. Small stuff, like turning down plans I wasn't excited about, or big stuff, like setting boundaries with the few family members who tried to convince me to reconcile before understanding what that would actually require. And somewhere in all of it, I realized the revenge I'd been so focused on, taking back my money, exposing the truth, wasn't actually the end goal. It was just the catalyst for something bigger, reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. 6 months after the Facebook explosion, Emma reached out asking if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no out of principle, but curiosity won. We sat across from each other in a Starbucks, and for the first time maybe ever, she looked uncomfortable, unsure, not like the golden child who'd glided through life on a cushion of parental favor. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you said," she started, hands wrapped around her cup like it was anchoring her. "And I talked to Mom and Dad about it. They deny a lot of it, but I can't unsee it now. The way they talk about you versus how they talk about me. The way they've always treated your achievements like footnotes and mine like headlines." It wasn't a full apology, and part of me wanted to demand one. Wanted her to grovel for every advantage she'd accepted without question while I got crumbs. But another part of me recognized something I hadn't expected. She was trying. She was here, sitting across from me, admitting she'd been blind, asking how to move forward. "I can't fix what they did," she said quietly. "And I can't undo the fact that I benefited from it. But I want to try to have an actual relationship with you. Not the one they scripted where I'm the star and you're the audience. A real one where we're just sisters." I didn't forgive her on the spot. Forgiveness felt too big, too final, too much like letting everyone off the hook. But I didn't shut her down either. We talked for 2 hours, and for the first time, I saw her as a whole person instead of just the symbol of everything I couldn't have. She was stuck in her own cage, terrified of losing the approval she'd built her identity on, starting to realize that being the favorite came with its own kind of prison. It didn't erase the inequality, didn't balance the scales, but it cracked open the possibility that maybe, eventually, we could build something that wasn't about competing for scraps of parental love. 3 months after that coffee, Dad sent me an email. Short, formal, awkward. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I owe you an apology. Not for the money. I still don't agree with how you handled that. But for the way we treated you growing up. Your mother and I had certain expectations, and when you didn't fit them, we didn't adjust. We pulled away instead of leaning in. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect. The jab about the money showed he still didn't fully get it, but it was more accountability than I'd ever gotten from him. No request for money. No demand that I fix things. Just acknowledgement. I didn't respond right away because I didn't know what I wanted to say, or if I wanted to say anything at all. The truth was, their apologies couldn't give me back my childhood or erase 30 years of damage. But they did offer something I hadn't expected. Proof that confronting them, that choosing myself, that refusing to stay silent had actually forced them to look at themselves. I didn't need to forgive them or welcome them back into my life on their terms. But knowing they finally saw what they'd done, that the truth I'd spoken had landed even if it took months, that was its own kind of justice. Not the explosive, satisfying revenge I'd imagined, but something quieter and more durable. The knowledge that I'd stopped accepting less than I deserved, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it had finally, slowly, started to make sense. A year after I took back my money, I was sitting in my apartment, paid for with my salary, decorated with my choices, and I realized something that almost made me laugh out loud. I'd won. Not in the dramatic revenge movie way I'd fantasized about when I first saw that Instagram post. I hadn't destroyed my family or made them suffer or forced them to publicly worship me the way they'd worshipped Emma, but I'd won something bigger and more permanent. I'd stopped needing them to validate me. I'd built a life that existed completely independent of their approval, their money, their presence. And that life was good. The job had turned into a career path with real potential. Patricia, Vanessa, and I still met every Thursday for dinner. This chosen family I'd built from scratch that showed up for me in ways my blood family never had. Emma and I were slowly, carefully building something that looked like sisterhood. Not the scripted version our parents had forced, but an honest one where we could talk about the damage and the inequality without pretending it hadn't shaped us. My savings account had more money than I'd ever had in my life, and every dollar in it represented a choice I'd made for myself instead of a sacrifice I'd made for people who didn't appreciate it. I still thought about that birthday sometimes. The cupcake, the silence, the Instagram post that had cracked me open, and I felt grateful for it, which was weird but true. Because without that public humiliation, I might have stayed stuck in that pattern forever, feeding money and energy into a black hole and calling it family. That post had been the final piece of evidence I needed to stop lying to myself about who they were and what I meant to them. And as much as it hurt, as shocking as it was to see it spelled out so casually for the world, it had set me free. Mom and I had spoken twice since Dad's email. Surface-level conversations about neutral topics, both of us testing the waters, neither of us willing to pretend the past didn't happen, but also not ready to live in it forever. She'd never fully apologized the way he had, never acknowledged the favoritism without justifications, but she'd stopped trying to manipulate me, which felt like progress, even if it was just self-preservation. I didn't know if we'd ever have a real relationship, the kind I desperately wanted as a kid, but I'd stopped needing it. And that shift, from desperate child to self-sufficient adult, changed everything. The truth about revenge, I realized, wasn't that it was sweet or that it fixed anything. It was that sometimes, what looks like revenge to other people is just you finally choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing them. Taking back my money wasn't about hurting my parents. It was about refusing to keep hurting myself. Exposing the truth on Facebook wasn't about shaming them. It was about refusing to carry their shame anymore. Every act of betrayal they accused me of was actually just me drawing a boundary, enforcing my dignity, insisting that I mattered as much as Emma did. And if that looked like vengeance to them, it was only because they'd gotten so comfortable with me accepting less. I thought about who I'd been a year ago. Small, invisible, still believing that if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, diminished myself enough, they'd finally see me and love me the way I needed. And then I looked at who I was now, employed, independent, surrounded by people who chose me without conditions, free from the constant weight of trying to earn something that should have been given freely. The woman I'd become didn't need payback anymore because she'd already gotten something better. She'd gotten herself back. And standing in my living room, looking at the life I'd built from the ashes of that 30th birthday, I felt something I hadn't felt in 30 years of chasing my family's approval. I felt proud, not of making them hurt, but of making myself whole. And that, I realized, was the only victory that had ever really mattered. So that's my story. From invisible daughter to woman who finally chose herself, even when it meant losing the family I'd spent 30 years trying to earn. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family? Have you experienced that gut-wrenching moment when you realized the people who were supposed to love you were actually using you? Drop a comment below and tell me your truth. Did you take your dignity back? Or are you still fighting for approval from people who'll never give it? What would you have done in my situation? Taken the money? Stayed silent? Burned it all down? I want to know, because these stories matter, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to finally choose themselves too. And listen, if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question the dynamics in your own life, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because I'm not done talking about family betrayal, about the revenge that comes from choosing yourself, about the justice of refusing to stay small for people who need you invisible. There are more stories coming, raw, real, unfiltered truths about what it takes to reclaim your self-worth when the world tells you to just forgive and forget. Don't miss them. Your dignity is waiting, and these conversations might just be the permission slip you need to finally take it back.